Morning, everybody. Hope this video finds you well. We're going to continue our discussion on weld symbols and welding symbols and go a little bit further in today. Just to review a little bit, our last video we talked about our double V bevels and open groove penetration, complete joint penetration. We have our depth of preparation, our depth of penetration, our included angle, which would be the complete angle added to, both angles added together, not individually, and all that. So we're going to continue on a little bit, and we're going to talk about a single bevel. Also pretty common, form it with MIG welding and stick welding. So this would be our single bevel, where only one side of the plate would have preparation done to it. Now, no different than our double bevel, or double V bevel, we have a symbol for it that represents what our joint actually looks like. And our straight vertical side of our single bevel is always to the left. Now that can vary on which side the plate actually gets prepared on. Sometimes it's specified, sometimes it doesn't matter. So if we have this scenario of just an arrow coming down, that means we're preparing this side with our symbol being on the arrow side, versus if it was on our other side, which means the opposite of the arrow. But in this case, it's set up on our arrow side, so that's what we have signified here. Now, with that, we have something with our arrow line called side significance. Now that is where you have your weld symbol as such, and we have a break in our arrow line, where instead of just continuing on straight, it has a break pointing to a specific plate. This is called side significance, meaning that it has to be this plate that gets prepared and not this one here. That can be for a lot of different reasons, and that's all up to the engineers, and we don't have a say in that. So, going back to this, we have a single bevel on our arrow side because it's below the reference line. We have a break in our arrow line telling us that it has to be this plate. Now, there have been some cases of the double arrow break still just signifying that this plate needs to be beveled. So, going off of that, we would prepare this plate, and it would have a specified degree in the opening of our single bevel right below that symbol. And so we would have 20 degrees there. Now, where we talked about included angles on a double V bevel, and each plate would only get half of that. So to kind of reiterate, if we have a 40-degree included angle on our weld symbol, each plate would only get 20 degrees. In this case, we only have one plate to prepare, so it would get all 20 degrees of it. So that side significance can be very important, and like I say, we don't always know the importance of it, but the engineers do, and there's a good reason why they put it in there. Okay. So, on occasion, we also talked about open groove and complete joint penetration. direction. So on occasion, we also have a weld that's called with backing. So we have our regular double B bevel, and we'll give it 45 degrees of included angle, and we'll have this little block up here. This little block tells me that it's not going to be open rigged. There will be a gap in there. We'll make it a 1/4 inch, but there will not be an open rig. So if we were to prepare this, we've got our double B bevel, excuse me. So we would prepare this to 45 degrees total, each one being 22.5 degrees. And instead of our plates touching here, just like our open rig, we would have a 1/4 inch, and we would put what's called a backing strip on the back side of the plate. This backing strip enables you to not have to do an open rig, and this backing strip then becomes a part of this plate. It's a lot easier than doing an open rig. More and more it's moving to this, and open rigs with 6010s are kind of, I guess, you can call it an antique way of doing things. If you can find a job that needs you to do open rig, it pays a whole lot because it's a harder thing to do, and it's kind of a lost art almost. So, but in this case, where we have our backing strip, we have our 1/4 inch gap, so that would just mean that our two plates at the backing strip would be a 1/4 inch apart. And also in this, there could be an R. That R means once we get completely done with this weld, and we filled everything up, and our CWIs come over and looked at it and inspected it, that R tells us that after the fact, we need to cut that backing strip off. So then you still have your weld all the way through, but now it's nice and flush and flat, and that could be for a lot of different reasons, most of which being more than likely it has to fit into a place and have clearance. And if you plan for a 1 inch plate or 2, 3, however thick the plate is, and you add a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch backing strip, it's not going to fit where you need it to. Sometimes, like in shipbuilding, if you can imagine this being the top deck of a large ship, like a cargo ship, you could have a backing strip down here, and a lot of times it would stay because you don't need it to be removed. It's just going to be a part of the ceiling that probably is going to get covered up anyway, so it can stay on there. So sometimes it gets removed, sometimes it doesn't, but it will always be specified on our weld symbol with that R. Moving on from that, let's do something fun here. Okay, so this would just be a multi-step welding assembly. So we have a structural T-joint here, and we will call this, let's call it 1 inch thick plate, both ways. So this could look kind of intimidating because there's 3 reference lines we have to work with. And the main thing to remember with this is kind of just step by step. Like my seniors, they have made the log cabins, and I'd handed them a blueprint to make it. And there's 4 different pictures of it. As I kind of tried to remind them, it can be overwhelming, but just go step by step. Don't let everything overwhelm you. So, when we have this, we always start at the arrow and work up and go off that information. Okay? So, if we start the arrow and work up, we have a single bevel on our other side of 20 degrees. So, if our arrow is pointing here, that means we need to make our bevel here of 20 degrees. So we can do that, make our cut. All right, now we've got a single bevel of 20 degrees. Our next step tells us we're going to be using gas metal arc welding, so that's our process. So that means we would go ahead and weld this up, and then once we're complete with this weld, says we need to do a 1 inch fillet weld. So that would be, excuse me, multi-pass. But then once we're filled up flush, we would go in and make our multi-pass fillet weld. Okay? So these multiple lines tell us the steps in order that we need to follow. Where this weld symbol, for example, we have our offset intermittent chain weld. There's not really a process to it. It's just go on and do it once it's marked out. There's not, you need to do this step and then this step and then this step. It's just go after it and get it done. So these reference lines moving up, they can be moving down just the same. But it always tells you step by step what you need to do first before the other. Let's look at that a different way. Okay, we've got our 3 arrow reference lines here. We've got a break, which again means side significance, meaning this plate is the one that needs to get what we're working with. So we'll do another single bevel, but we'll do it arrow side this time. And we'll make it 30 degrees. And we'll do some stick welding this time, shielded metal arc welding. So we're going to bevel that, we're going to weld it up, and have that in there. Okay, so here again, we just started the arrow and work up. So we have side significance, meaning this is the side that needs the bevel. On our arrow side, since we're on the bottom of the reference line. So we make our bevel, it's 30 degrees. And then we move up to our next reference line. We have shielded metal arc welding, which is stick welding. And then we have our contour symbol of concave, meaning it's going to be sunken in as opposed to protruding. And it can be ground that way with that large G. So we would go ahead and make our weld, but they want us to make sure that we are below flush on the face of the weld. And the G up here that stands for grind tells us that if we do go over, it's permitted for us to grind it down to what we need. If it's not permitted, you could always ask a CWI, a certified welding inspector, or your engineer about it, or your foreman even. But a lot of times, if they don't have specified that you're allowed to grind, you're not supposed to. So, something to keep in mind with that. Okay. We have a couple other joints to talk about here. They are single flare and double flare joints. Okay, so this would be a good example of a single flare joint. Our flare weld symbol would look like this, where we have just a vertical straight line and then one line that almost looks like a monkey tail, how it's kind of curved like that. And if you could flip this over, I guess if we put it on the other side, it would look just like it. We're still our vertical, and then our monkey tail. That looks exactly like what we have here. We have a piece of tubing, we'll call it, and then a piece of pipe. And this pipe is represented by this left flare. And that would be where you would make your weld in here. Simple enough, right? Looks exactly like what it is. So we have our single flare, then we have a double flare. And that would be if two pipes were side by side or just round pieces of tube, whichever. So that would be your double V flare groove, okay? Not extremely common, but still out there enough that we need to talk about it. Now, the V or single flare groove and the double flare groove are not really ones that we would prepare because it'd be hard to get that curvature in there. We could do straight lines, be it angled, vertical, whichever, but it's pretty difficult to make a curved piece like that. So a lot of times it would have a piece of pipe or round tubing involved and wouldn't necessarily be something we would do. So I guess that will conclude this lesson. I will have a worksheet on this. Make sure everybody is pleased doing this, but also definitely finishing up on work you might need to before the end of the 9 weeks on Friday. And hopefully soon we can all reconvene back in class. Hope you all have a good day. Thank you.